The silence in the house was the loudest thing Eleanor had ever heard. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that clung to the furniture and seeped into the walls, a constant reminder of what was gone. Just months ago, this small cottage had been filled with the cheerful, off-key humming of her husband Liam. He had a tune for everything, for making coffee, for fixing the leaky tap, for reading the newspaper. Now the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a painful measure of the time stretching out before her, empty and vast. She would often stand in the middle of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to remember the feeling of his embrace. But the memory was already starting to fade, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Her days became a blur of monotonous tasks, performed on autopilot. She would wake up, make a single cup of tea, and stare out the window at the garden Liam had so lovingly tended. The roses were beginning to wilt, their petals browning at the edges, mirroring the decay she felt in her own heart. Friends would call, their voices filled with a pity she couldn't stand. They offered casseroles and sympathetic words, but none of it could fill the gaping hole he had left behind. Grief was a solitary island, and she was its only inhabitant. The world outside, with its laughter and plans and forward motion, felt like a foreign country she no longer had a passport for. At night, the loneliness was at its worst. She would lie in their bed, the space beside her cold and achingly empty. Sleep offered little escape, her dreams filled with fragments of their life together. A shared smile, the warmth of his hand in hers, the sound of his laughter echoing just out of reach. She would wake with a start, her heart pounding, the reality of her loss crashing down on her all over again. The vibrant colors of her life had been washed away, leaving only shades of gray. She was adrift, a ship without a rudder, lost in a sea of sorrow with no shoreline in sight. She wondered if she would ever feel like herself again, or if this hollowed-out version was all that was left. The world kept spinning, but Eleanor felt stuck. She had been one half of a whole for so long that she had forgotten how to be just one. Liam had been her anchor, her compass, her quiet strength. Without him, she felt fragile and exposed, like a house with no roof, vulnerable to every storm. The simple act of making a decision, even something as small as what to have for dinner, felt monumental. She was not just mourning a husband, she was mourning the person she had been with him. This new life, this solitary existence, was a costume that didn't fit, and she had no idea how to take it off or if she even wanted to. One Tuesday afternoon, while sorting through a stack of old mail, a brightly colored flyer slipped out from between a bill and a bank statement. It was a cheerful, almost offensively bright shade of yellow. The Great City Scavenger Symphony, it declared in bold, playful letters. The flyer described a month-long citywide game, a competition that wasn't about speed or strength, but about creativity, observation, and teamwork. Participants would be given a series of cryptic clues, leading them to forgotten corners of the city, where they had to capture sounds instead of objects. The goal was to weave these collected sounds into a unique soundtrack of the city. It sounded utterly bizarre, and her first instinct was to toss it into the recycling bin. But something made her pause. Perhaps it was the sheer absurdity of it, a stark contrast to the gray monotony of her life. Or maybe it was the word symphony. Liam had loved music. He didn't play an instrument, but he appreciated the way different notes could come together to create something beautiful and whole. He always said their life together was like a perfect song. The idea of creating a symphony of sounds, of finding music in the everyday noise of the world, felt like a distant echo of him. It was a strange and fragile thread of connection, but it was the first thing that had sparked even a flicker of interest in her for months. Fear was a close companion to that flicker of interest. The thought of joining a competition, of meeting new people, of putting herself out there was terrifying. It meant leaving the sad comfort of her quiet house. It meant trying, and possibly failing. What if she made a fool of herself? What if she couldn't solve the clues? What if she was paired with people who saw her only as the grieving widow? Every doubt screamed at her to stay where she was, to retreat back into the safety of her sorrow. It was easier to be numb than to risk feeling anything else, especially disappointment. Yet, a small, rebellious voice whispered back. What was the alternative? More silent days, more wilted roses, more nights spent staring at the ceiling. The flyer promised a new way of seeing, or rather hearing, the city she had lived in for years but had barely noticed lately. It was a challenge, and a part of her, a part she thought had died with Liam, was tired of being passive. With a deep breath that felt like the first real one she had taken in ages, she walked over to her laptop. Her fingers trembled as she typed in the web address from the flyer. It was a tiny step, a quiet click of a mouse, but it felt like a seismic shift. The first day of the Scavenger Symphony was held in a bustling community hall, a place humming with an energy that felt both overwhelming and strangely invigorating. Eleanor stood by the door, clutching her tote bag like a shield, feeling utterly out of place. The room was filled with people of all ages, laughing and chatting, their faces bright with anticipation. She saw groups of friends, confident young students and adventurous-looking couples. Her own solitary presence felt stark and clumsy. For a moment she considered turning around and fleeing back to the predictable quiet of her home, where she wouldn't have to pretend to be okay. Just as she was about to retreat, a woman with a kind smile and a cascade of silver braids approached her. "First time?" the woman asked, her voice warm and gentle. Eleanor could only nod, her throat suddenly tight. "I'm Martha," the woman said, extending a hand. "I'm a veteran of these silly games. They're good for the soul." Martha's easy confidence was disarming. Before Eleanor could protest, Martha had guided her toward the registration table. She was assigned to a team. Team Nightingale. Her teammates were Media Group, small team gathered around registration table, young man with headphones, older woman and reserved woman, mismatched team meeting for the first time at its stock at a distribute_equally. A lanky, quiet university student named Ben, who was perpetually attached to his headphones, and Martha herself. It was a strange, mismatched trio. Their first clue was a riddle written on a small, scroll-like piece of paper. "I have no voice, but I tell all stories. I have spines, but cannot feel. Find my chorus in the hush of turning pages." Ben, without a word, immediately pointed toward the city's grand old library. The task seemed simple enough on the surface, but the emotional weight of it was immense for Eleanor. The library had been one of her and Liam's favorite places. They had spent countless Sunday afternoons there, reading in comfortable silence. The thought of going back, of walking through those doors alone, made her stomach clench with a familiar ache of loss. As they walked, Martha chatted away, telling stories of past scavenger hunts and pointing out architectural details on the buildings they passed. Ben remained mostly silent, but he would occasionally offer a quiet, insightful observation. Eleanor found herself listening, her focus shifting from the storm of grief inside her to the world around her. She noticed the rhythmic clatter of a skateboard on the pavement, the distant chime of a church bell, the cheerful chirping of sparrows in a tree. These were the sounds they were meant to be collecting. For the first time, she wasn't just hearing noise, she was starting to listen for music. Entering the library was as difficult as Eleanor had feared. The familiar scent of old paper and wood polish hit her like a wave, pulling her back in time. She saw specters of herself and Liam in every corner, by the history section where he loved to browse, in the cozy armchairs where they would read side by side. A profound sadness settled over her, so heavy she could barely breathe. She felt the old impulse to retreat, to run from the pain. Her steps faltered, and she felt a million miles away from her new teammates, lost in a private, soundproof room of her own memories and sorrow. The sounds she was supposed to be capturing were drowned out by the noise of her own grief. Martha seemed to sense her distress. Instead of pushing her or offering empty platitudes, she simply placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "It's all right, dear," she whispered softly. "Memories are loud, aren't they? They can be the hardest sounds to listen past." Her words were a balm. It was a simple acknowledgement of her pain, not an attempt to fix it. Ben surprisingly pulled off his headphones. "The clue says chorus in the hush," he said quietly. "Maybe we're not just looking for the sound of pages turning. Maybe we're looking for the silence in between." His perspective was unexpected, and it shifted her own. His words gave her an idea. She thought about the quiet hum of the library's ventilation system, the soft thud of a book being placed on a shelf, the almost inaudible tap of fingers on a keyboard. These were the subtle sounds that created the library's unique atmosphere of hushed reverence. It was a silence that wasn't empty, but full. Focusing on these tiny, specific sounds became an anchor. It was a way to be present in the space without being completely consumed by the ghosts of the past. It was a form of meditation, a way to quiet the cacophony in her own mind by concentrating on the gentle symphony around her. Slowly, carefully, Eleanor began to record. She captured the whisper of a page turning, the soft squeak of a librarian's cart, the gentle sigh of someone lost in a story. Each sound she collected was a small victory, a step away from the overwhelming grief and toward engagement with the present moment. She was still sad, the ache was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. By focusing on the task, on the game, she was learning to navigate the painful spaces, not just avoid them. She was discovering that she could hold both sorrow and purpose in her hands at the same time. The library was no longer just a museum of her past, it was now a part of her new story. So, the weeks of the Scavenger Symphony unfolded, and with them, the tentative bond between Eleanor, Martha, and Ben began to strengthen. They were, an odd trio, a mosaic of different generations and personalities, but they found a strange harmony. Martha, with her endless optimism and warm heart, was their emotional anchor. She really had a knack for knowing when to offer a story, when to share a flask of hot tea, and when to simply be a comforting presence. She never pried into Eleanor's past, but created a safe space where Eleanor felt she could share if she wanted to, which eventually she did, in small, careful pieces. Ben, initially so withdrawn and lost in his own world of music, slowly began to emerge from his shell. He had this incredible ear for sound and an encyclopedic knowledge of the city's hidden nooks and crannies. He showed them how to hear the melody in a rattling drainpipe and the percussion in the clatter of a train over a bridge. He started sharing his own music with them, playing tentative compositions on his phone that were inspired by the sounds they collected. In his quiet way, he showed Eleanor that it was possible to find beauty and create something new, even from the most mundane or chaotic elements of life. Eleanor, in turn, found she had something to offer them. Her years with Liam, an architect, had given her an eye for detail and an appreciation for the city's structure. She would notice patterns in brickwork or the unique echo in a forgotten alleyway that the others might have missed. She began to share stories of her life with Liam, not with the heavy weight of grief, but with a gentle nostalgia. She told them about his terrible humming and his love for old maps. Talking about him to her new friends didn't erase the pain, but it changed its shape. It made the memories feel less like a burden and more like a cherished part of who she was. Their friendship was forged in shared adventures and small moments of connection. There was the afternoon they spent an hour trying to capture the sound of a flag flapping in the wind on a government building, dissolving into laughter when a sudden gust nearly took Martha's hat. There was the evening they sat on a park bench, sharing sandwiches and listening to the city's evening chorus, distant sirens, children's laughter, and the gentle rustle of leaves. In these moments, surrounded by her new friends, Eleanor felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in a very long time. She was no longer just a widow. She was Eleanor, a member of Team Nightingale. As the competition progressed, Eleanor noticed a subtle but profound shift within herself. The fear that had once paralyzed her was beginning to recede, replaced by a budding sense of confidence. She found herself volunteering to take the lead on certain clues, navigating the city's public transport system with an ease she hadn't felt in years. When Liam was alive, he had always been the planner, the one who took charge of directions and logistics. She had happily let him lead, but now she was discovering her own capability. She was learning that she was more resourceful and resilient than she had ever given herself credit for. The game required her to step far outside her comfort zone, and with each step, that zone expanded. One clue led them to a bustling street market, a chaotic symphony of vendors shouting, produce being chopped, and music blasting from a dozen different stalls. At first, the noise was overwhelming, a sensory assault that made her want to retreat. But then she remembered Ben's advice to listen for the individual notes within the noise. She focused on the rhythmic thud of a butcher's cleaver, the musical lilt of a fruit seller's call, the percussive sound of coins being exchanged. She was learning to find order in chaos, both in the city and within herself. This newfound confidence spilled over into other areas of her life. She started tackling tasks at home that she had been avoiding for months. She fixed the dripping tap in the kitchen, a job Liam would have normally done, feeling a surge of pride at the accomplishment. She went into the garden, not with a sense of duty or sorrow, but with a genuine desire to bring it back to life. She pruned the wilting roses, planted new flowers, and found a quiet joy in feeling the soil between her fingers. The house was slowly starting to feel like her own space, not just an echo of a life that was gone. Most importantly, she was learning to trust her own judgment and her own feelings again. Grief had made her second-guess everything, but the game, with its puzzles and creative challenges, forced her to rely on her own instincts. She discovered a playful, creative side to herself that had long been dormant. During one challenge, she suggested they record the sound of raindrops hitting different surfaces, a metal drainpipe, a canvas awning, a puddle, to create a rain symphony. Martha and Ben loved the idea. Seeing her idea come to life, hearing the beautiful, complex soundscape they created together, was incredibly empowering. She was not just a participant in the game, she was a composer of her own new life. The penultimate clue of the Scavenger Symphony was the most challenging yet. It was a cryptic poem that spoke of a voice that soars above the city, born of steel and air, a bridge between two shores. After much debate, Ben figured it out. It had to be the sound of the wind whistling through the cables of the city's highest suspension bridge. The very thought sent a jolt of pure terror through Eleanor. She had a deep, long-standing fear of heights, a fear that Liam had always gently helped her manage. They would always take the long way around, avoiding high places. The idea of walking out onto that bridge, high above the churning water, felt impossible. Her first reaction was to say no, to tell Martha and Ben to go on without her. The old Eleanor, the one defined by her fears and her loss, would have stayed behind. But as she looked at the hopeful faces of her friends, who had come to rely on her as much as she relied on them, she felt a different impulse. This competition had become more than just a game. It was a journey, and this bridge was a literal and metaphorical obstacle she needed to cross. Giving up now would feel like a betrayal, not just to her team, but to the stronger person she was becoming. Martha, ever perceptive, saw the fear in Eleanor's eyes. "We'll do it together," she said, her voice firm but kind. "One step at a time. You won't be alone." Ben added, "Just focus on the sound, Eleanor. Think of it as capturing the bridge's song. Nothing else matters." Their support was a safety net woven from trust and friendship. With a trembling heart, Eleanor took the first step onto the pedestrian walkway of the bridge. Her legs felt weak, and her palms were slick with sweat. She kept her eyes fixed on the path directly in front of her, avoiding the dizzying view below. As they walked toward the center of the bridge, the wind picked up, creating a low, mournful hum as it moved through the massive steel cables. It was an eerie, beautiful sound. Following Ben's advice, Eleanor lifted her recorder and focused all her attention on that single, powerful note. She closed her eyes, letting the sound fill her senses. In that moment, she wasn't a woman afraid of heights. She was a sound collector, capturing a rare and magnificent piece of the city's symphony. She was doing it. She was standing in the middle of her greatest fear, and she was not falling. She was flying. The final event of the Scavenger Symphony was a showcase held in a modern concert hall. Each team presented their 5-minute soundtrack of the city to a packed audience and a panel of judges. Backstage, Eleanor felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but it was different this time. It wasn't the anxiety of fear, but the exhilarating buzz of anticipation. Team Nightingale huddled together, making last-minute adjustments to their soundscape. Their piece was a journey, starting with the quiet, hopeful sounds of the library and building through the market's chaos, the rain's gentle melody, and culminating in the powerful, soaring hum of the suspension bridge. When their team name was called, they walked onto the stage. As the lights dimmed and their soundtrack began to play, a hush fell over the auditorium. The sounds they had so carefully collected filled the space, painting a vivid, audible picture of the city. Eleanor watched the faces in the audience. She saw people closing their eyes, smiling, nodding along to the rhythms they had found in the urban landscape. Their creation was more than just a collection of noises. It was a story, a poem, an expression of their shared experience. It was a testament to their unlikely friendship and the beauty they had found in the most unexpected places. Their piece ended with the lone, powerful sound of the wind on the bridge, which slowly faded into a recording of a single, clear birdsong they had captured in a park. The transition from the man-made hum to the natural melody created a moment of pure, breathtaking beauty. It spoke of resilience, of nature finding a way to sing even in the heart of a concrete jungle. When the sound faded to complete silence, the hall was still for a moment before erupting into thunderous applause. Eleanor stood on the stage, bathed in the warm light, and felt a wave of emotion wash over her. Not grief, but an overwhelming sense of pride and gratitude. In the end, Team Nightingale didn't win the grand prize. That honor went to a group of talented music students whose composition was technically brilliant. But for Eleanor, the outcome of the competition didn't matter. The real victory had already been won. It had been won in the library when she chose to listen past her pain. It had been won in the market when she found order in chaos. And it had been won on the bridge, high above the water, when she faced her deepest fear and found her courage. The prize she received was not a trophy, but a renewed sense of self. In the days following the Scavenger Symphony, the quiet in Eleanor's house returned, but it was no longer a heavy, suffocating silence. It was a peaceful quiet, a space for thought and reflection. The house felt like home again, her home. She filled it with music, not just Liam's old records, but new compositions by Ben and the classical stations Martha loved. She spent her afternoons in the garden, her hands in the earth, cultivating new life. The roses were blooming again, their vibrant red a testament to care and perseverance. The world was no longer a muted gray. The colors were slowly, beautifully returning. Her friendship with Martha and Ben continued to blossom. They met for coffee every week, their bond solidifying beyond the context of the game. Martha encouraged her to join a book club, while Ben invited her to one of his small, intimate concerts. She was building a new community, a new support system, not to replace what she had lost, but to add new, wonderful layers to her life. She was no longer just Liam's widow. She was Eleanor, a gardener, a friend, a book lover, a concert goer, and an adventurer who had captured the song of a bridge. She realized that grief was not an island she had to escape from, but a landscape she had to learn to navigate. It would always be a part of her story, a valley she had walked through. But the game had taught her that the path continued on, leading to new mountains to climb and new vistas to discover. It had retuned her ears to the world, showing her that even after the most profound silence, there is always music waiting to be found. It exists in the kindness of a new friend, in the satisfaction of a task well done, and in the quiet strength discovered within oneself. Eleanor's journey was far from over, but she was no longer adrift. She had found her anchor within herself. The future, which had once seemed like a terrifying, empty expanse, now felt like an open score, a piece of music waiting to be written. There would be sad notes and difficult passages, she knew, but there would also be moments of soaring joy and quiet harmony. Holding on to the love of her past while embracing the promise of her future, Eleanor picked up her pen. She was ready to compose the next movement of her life, one hopeful, resilient note at a time.